In the rugged landscapes of the Iberian Peninsula, a kingdom was forged that would eventually sail across the horizon and claim half the world. From the sun-drenched plains of Castile to the misty mountains of the Basque Country, Spain's story is one of spectacular extremes. It is a tale of conquistadors and cathedrals, of gold and galleons, of a brutal civil war, and a stunning cultural rebirth. This is the story of how Spain unified, dominated the oceans as the world's first global superpower, and eventually redefined its identity in the modern age. 1492, the year that changed everything. The story of modern Spain doesn't just begin in 1492, it explodes into existence. To understand this year, we have to look at what came before. For nearly 800 years, the peninsula had been a battleground. Christian kingdoms in the north had been engaged in the Reconquista, a grueling, century-spanning crusade to reclaim land from the Muslim Moors, who had arrived in 711 CE. By the late 15th century, two powerful rulers emerged, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. Their marriage in 1469 didn't just join two people, it joined two kingdoms, creating the foundation of the nation we now call Spain. In January 1492, their combined armies finally captured Granada, the last Moorish stronghold. The Reconquista was over. Spain was, for the first time in nearly a millennium, a unified Christian land. But the Catholic monarchs weren't finished. With the internal wars over, they looked toward the Atlantic. They took a massive gamble on a Genoese explorer named Christopher Columbus, who claimed he could reach the riches of Asia by sailing west. When his three small ships hit the white sands of the Caribbean, it wasn't just a discovery, it was a collision of worlds. Almost overnight, Spain went from a regional European power to the gateway of a new world. This set off a gold rush of epic proportions. While other European nations were still fighting local border disputes, Spain was claiming entire continents. This year also saw the expulsion of the Jews, and later the Muslims who refused to convert, a decision that ensured religious unity, but also stripped Spain of many of its most talented doctors, bankers, and scholars, a choice that would haunt the Spanish economy centuries later. The Siglo de Oro, the golden age of an empire. The 16th century is known as the Siglo de Oro, or the Golden Age. This was the era when Spain wasn't just a superpower, it was the superpower. Under the Habsburg kings, Charles V and Philip II, Spain controlled an empire so vast that it was the original empire on which the sun never sets. Charles V was perhaps the most powerful man to ever live in Europe. He wasn't just the King of Spain, he was the Holy Roman Emperor, ruling over parts of Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and the vast territories in the Americas. His life was a constant journey, moving from one end of his empire to the other, fighting off the Ottoman Turks in the east and Protestant rebels in the north. While Charles fought the wars of Europe, his conquistadors were rewriting the map of the Americas. Men like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro led small bands of soldiers into the hearts of the Aztec and Inca empires. Using a lethal combination of steel armor, horses, gunpowder, and, unintentionally, European diseases like smallpox, they toppled civilizations that had stood for centuries. The wealth that followed was staggering. The Spanish discovered a literal mountain of silver at Potosí in modern-day Bolivia. Every year, the Spanish treasure fleet, massive armed galleons, crossed the Atlantic, carrying tons of silver and gold to the docks of Seville. This wealth funded the most magnificent court in Europe and allowed Spain to build the Escorial, a massive palace monastery that served as the nerve center of the global empire. This wasn't just an age of gold, but an age of genius. This era produced Miguel de Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, a book that essentially invented the modern novel by poking fun at the fading ideals of knighthood. Painters like El Greco and later Diego Velázquez captured the pride and the hidden sadness of the Spanish court on canvas. Spain was the cultural, religious, and military heartbeat of the Catholic world. The Spanish road and the price of piety. By the time Philip II took the throne, the empire was at its zenith, but the cracks were beginning to show. Philip was an intensely religious man who saw himself as the defender of the Catholic faith against the rising tide of the Protestant Reformation. He spent his life working at a small wooden desk in the Escorial, micromanaging a global empire through thousands of letters. To maintain his grip on the Netherlands and fight the Protestants, he developed the Spanish Road, a military supply route that stretched from the Mediterranean through the Alps to northern Europe. It was a masterpiece of logistics, but it was incredibly expensive. Philip's religious zeal eventually brought him into direct conflict with Elizabeth I of England. In 1588, he launched the Spanish Armada, a great and most fortunate navy of 130 ships, designed to invade England and restore Catholicism. It was a disaster. English fire ships and a massive Atlantic storm, the Protestant wind, scattered the fleet. While Spain remained the dominant power for decades more, the myth of Spanish invincibility had been shattered. The slow decay, inflation, and inbreeding. The 17th century was a long, slow twilight for the Spanish Empire. A strange thing happened to the Spanish economy. The more silver that arrived from the Americas, the poorer the country became. This is a phenomenon economists now call the resource curse. The flood of silver caused massive inflation, making Spanish goods too expensive to export. Instead of building factories or improving farms, the nobility spent their wealth on foreign luxury goods. Spain became a giant funnel, where gold entered from the west and immediately flowed out to the bankers of Italy and the manufacturers of Germany. At the same time, the Habsburg dynasty was literally shrinking. To keep their vast lands within the family, the Habsburgs married their cousins and nieces for generations. By the time of Charles II, known as the Bewitched, the king was physically and mentally unable to rule or produce an heir. His death in 1700 sparked the War of the Spanish Succession, a massive European conflict that ended with a new dynasty on the throne, the Bourbons. The Bourbons, originally from France, tried to enlighten Spain. They built grand boulevards in Madrid, modernized the navy, and tried to fix the tax system. For a while, it worked. Spain saw a modest recovery in the 1700s, but the world was changing. The American and French revolutions were sending shockwaves through the Atlantic, and Spain's colonies were watching closely. Napoleon and the Guerrilla War. In 1808, the Spanish Empire faced a catastrophe that would shatter its stability forever. Napoleon Bonaparte, having conquered much of Europe, turned his sights on the Iberian Peninsula. He tricked the Spanish royal family into abdication and placed his brother, Joseph, on the throne. Napoleon viewed Spain as a backward nation that would passively accept his modern Enlightenment laws. He was fatally mistaken. The spark of resistance ignited on the 2nd of May, 1808, in Madrid. Ordinary citizens, armed with nothing more than kitchen knives and paving stones, rose against the professional French occupiers. The French response was swift and merciless, marked by mass executions that the painter Francisco Goya later immortalized in his haunting masterpiece, the 3rd of May, 1808. This local uprising exploded into the Peninsular War, a 6-year struggle of unprecedented savagery. During this conflict, the Spanish invented a revolutionary tactical style, the guerrilla, which meant little war. These were not regular soldiers, but small bands of peasants, farmers, and even priests who used their knowledge of the rugged terrain to ambush French patrols and sabotage supply lines before vanishing into the mountains. While these guerrilla tactics exhausted Napoleon's forces, famously dubbed his Spanish ulcer, and provided critical support for the Duke of Wellington's British-Portuguese army to eventually drive the French out, the cost was total. By the time the war ended in 1814, Spain was a hollow shell. The country was scorched, bankrupt, and politically traumatized. Furthermore, with the central government in chaos, Spain's colonies in the Americas saw their opportunity to revolt, signaling the beginning of the end for the world's first global empire. The loss of the Americas, 1898, and the Generation of '98. While Spain was fighting Napoleon, its colonies in the Americas realized they didn't need a king in Madrid anymore. Led by the Liberator, Simón Bolívar in the north, and José de San Martín in the south, South and Central America erupted in revolution. By 1825, the vast empire that had been built by the conquistadors was gone, leaving Spain with only a few islands: Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. For the rest of the 19th century, Spain was a country at war with itself. It suffered through 3 Carlist wars, bloody civil conflicts over who should be king, and constant military coups. The final humiliation came in 1898. In a short, one-sided war with the rising power of the United States, Spain lost its last overseas colonies. This event, known as the disaster, caused a deep national identity crisis. A group of writers and thinkers, known as the Generation of '98, began to ask hard questions. Why had Spain fallen so far? Was it the church? The monarchy? The lack of education? They looked at the dusty plains of Castile and saw a nation that was paralyzed in time, while the rest of the world moved into the industrial age. The Republic and the shadows of 1936. The early 20th century saw Spain struggling to catch up. In 1931, the monarchy was abolished, and the Second Spanish Republic was born. It was a time of great hope, but also terrifying violence. The Republic wanted to take land from the rich, reduce the power of the Catholic Church, and give rights to workers. This terrified the conservative elite, the military, and the religious peasantry. By 1936, the country was a powder keg. In July, a group of military officers, including a young general named Francisco Franco, launched a coup. The coup failed to take the whole country, and Spain collapsed into a horrific civil war. This wasn't just a Spanish war, it was a battleground for the world's ideologies. Hitler and Mussolini sent planes and tanks to help Franco's nationalists, while the Soviet Union sent aid to the Republicans. Volunteers from around the world, the international brigades, flocked to Spain to fight fascism. The war was marked by incredible brutality on both sides, with priests being executed in Republican zones and intellectuals, like the poet Federico Garcia Lorca, being murdered by nationalists. In 1937, the German Luftwaffe bombed the small Basque town of Guernica, an event Picasso turned into the most famous anti-war painting in history. By 1939, Madrid fell. Franco was the victor. The Franco era, the long silence. For nearly 40 years, Spain lived under the shadow of Generalissimo Francisco Franco. He titled himself the Caudillo, the leader, and ruled with an iron fist. Spain became a national Catholic state where the church and the military controlled every aspect of life. Thousands of Republicans were executed or imprisoned in the years after the war, and millions more lived in a long silence, afraid to speak of the past. Initially, Franco tried to make Spain self-sufficient, autarky, which led to years of starvation and poverty. However, by the late 1950s, a group of technocrats convinced him to open the economy. This led to the Spanish miracle of the 1960s. High-rise hotels sprouted along the Mediterranean coast as Northern Europeans discovered the sun and cheap prices of Spain. This mass tourism brought in much-needed cash, but it also brought in foreign ideas and styles that the conservative regime couldn't control. The transition from dictatorship to democracy. When Generalissimo Francisco Franco finally died in 1975, a heavy cloud of uncertainty hung over the Iberian Peninsula. After nearly 40 years of iron-fisted dictatorship, most international experts and terrified citizens expected the country to spiral back into the bloody chaos of another civil war. Instead, Spain executed a political masterpiece that the world now remembers as La Transición. The catalyst for this change was the man Franco had personally groomed to continue his legacy, King Juan Carlos I. In a stunning move of political subversion, the king did the exact opposite of what was expected. Rather than maintaining the authoritarian status quo, he partnered with visionary reformers like Adolfo Suárez to systematically dismantle the regime from within. They navigated a delicate path between the bunker, the die-hard Francoists, and the exiled democratic opposition. This high-stakes maneuvering culminated in 1978, when Spain passed a new constitution, officially transforming the nation into a modern parliamentary democracy. However, the fragile new democracy faced its ultimate trial by fire on February 23, 1981. In an event known as 23F, a group of right-wing military officers, led by Antonio Tejero, stormed the Spanish parliament and held the entire government at gunpoint. With tanks in the streets of Valencia, the coup seemed poised to succeed. In the darkest hour of the night, King Juan Carlos appeared on national television in his full military uniform as Captain General. He delivered a firm, historic address, denouncing the uprising and ordering the army to remain in their barracks. His decisive stand stripped the rebels of their legitimacy and signaled that the era of military intervention was over. The coup collapsed by morning, and Spanish democracy was saved, proving that the nation's commitment to freedom was no longer a dream, but a permanent reality. Modern Spain, rebirth and resilience. Since the 1980s, Spain has undergone a social revolution more dramatic than its political one. Once among Europe's most conservative nations, it has transformed into a socially progressive leader. Joining the European Union in 1986 sparked an infrastructure boom, with high-speed AVE trains now connecting the peninsula with a speed the Habsburgs could never have imagined. Spain's soft power is once again a global force. In cinema, Pedro Almodóvar introduced a vibrant, queer Spanish aesthetic to the world, while the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao proved that avant-garde architecture could revive a dying industrial city. Even the kitchen became a laboratory. Spanish cuisine evolved from simple peasant fare to the cutting edge of molecular gastronomy under chefs like Ferran Adrià. Meanwhile, on the pitch, the national team and clubs like Real Madrid and FC Barcelona established a decade of global dominance. Today, the nation faces modern trials. The tension between Madrid and regions with distinct identities, such as Catalonia and the Basque Country, remains a major political flashpoint, alongside economic pressures within the Eurozone. Yet, Spain's 500-year story is defined by incredible resilience. It is a nation that has survived the heights of global empire and the depths of total ruin, moving from the fanaticism of the Inquisition to the liberties of a modern democracy. The conquistadors and silver galleons are long gone, but the Spanish spirit, the duende, remains. Whether in the tapas bars of Madrid or the galleries of Barcelona, Spain continues to be a land of passion, contrast, and endless reinvention.